Let's jump right into this explainer with something that might completely shift your historical and spiritual paradigm. When we look back at the grand sweep of biblical history, it's so easy to view it as a series of disconnected eras or completely different sets of rules. But today, we're going to look at this through a totally different lens, one that brings everything into a sharp, unified focus.
So did Abraham, Moses, and Jesus actually preach the exact same message? Well, I firmly believe they weren't preaching different dispensations or fragmented ideas at all. Instead, they were in absolute total agreement on exactly how society and governance should function. They were actually laying down a continuous, unbroken path for humanity. And once you see the striking similarities in the message they all preached, it absolutely changes how you view the whole shebang.
Section 1. One unified message.
To really see this, we've got to trace their steps and realize they were all leading people away from the exact same trap. This isn't just some high-level theological idea. It's a super practical societal blueprint. Just look at this timeline. The continuity is amazing. You've got Abraham fleeing the system of his idolatrous father, Terah, in Ur. Then you have Moses pulling the Israelites out of Egyptian bondage, a bondage they originally fell into because they were lured in by the promise of free bread and state welfare. And then centuries later, Jesus strictly warns against the oppressive, extracting systems of Herod and the Pharisees. They were all pointing humanity toward a very specific way of organizing society and warning against a very specific type of societal bondage.
Section 2. The true meaning of idolatry.
Now, to truly grasp what they were all running from, we need to redefine a word we probably thought we already understood. Biblical idolatry isn't just about ancient people bowing down to golden statues. It's actually covetousness. It's desiring social benefits that are extracted by force from your neighbors. It happens when a society decides to use men who exercise authority to take from one group to give to another. That is the exact system Abraham walked away from. That's the system Moses led his people out of, and that's exactly what Jesus was preaching against.
The Apostle Paul makes it undeniably clear right here in Colossians that covetousness is literally idolatry. It's a system that turns us into human resources and mere possessions of the state. Because when we rely on a system of forced extraction for our daily needs, things like education, healthcare, or welfare, we become entangled in the exact same idolatry that ancient Babylon, Egypt, and Rome practiced.
Section 3. Two systems of care.
You see, throughout history, there have always been two fiercely competing systems for caring for society. It all boils down to how a society chooses to take care of its sick, its elderly, and its needy. This really brilliantly illustrates the contrast. On one side, you have a system that relies on coercion, forced taxes, and basically making you a human resource of the state. That's the way of Babylon. On the flip side, the righteous system, the one preached consistently by Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, relies entirely on voluntary charity, faith, and networks of hope. One operates by force, the other operates by love. And by the way, building that system of love is exactly what we aim to help you do at preparingyou.app.
To give you a perfect example of this clash, let's look at the concept of korban. Jesus fiercely criticized the Pharisees because they took korban, which under Moses was meant to be a pure, free will sacrifice, and they completely twisted it into a mandatory public religion and social security tax under Herod. Jesus was stepping in and basically saying, look, you claim to follow Moses, but you've completely inverted his system of voluntary charity.
Jesus directly commands us not to operate like the governments of the Gentiles. You know, the ones who call themselves benefactors but exercise authority by taking from one person to give to another. He says, it shall not be so among you. He's reiterating the exact same message of liberty and voluntary community that Moses established when they left Egypt, and that Abraham established when he left his father's household.
This actually completely reframes one of the most famous statements in history. When Jesus told Pontius Pilate his kingdom was not of this world, he used the Greek word cosmos. He was legally declaring his constitutional order was entirely separate from Rome's forced taxation system. He wasn't talking about floating away on a cloud somewhere. He was talking about a real, functioning societal order based on charity, not force.
So to step out of that forced system today and actually live out this unified biblical message, we have to build our own networks of voluntary charity. And that is exactly why you need to visit preparingyou.app. This app is created with the intention to prepare the user to live according to the laws of nature, the simple, logical, and righteous life God has intended all to live by. It's all about putting these ancient, unified teachings into practical, modern action.
Section 4. The early Christian stand. Let's jump over to history for a second and see how this builds into an incredible, real-world courtroom drama. because the early Christians fully understood this assignment. They knew exactly what Jesus, Moses, and Abraham were talking about, and they literally put their lives on the line for it. Back in the year 180 AD, a Roman proconsul in North Africa named Vigilius Saturninus put a group of Christians on trial for what he basically considered tax evasion. It's a fascinating historical moment because it perfectly shows the collision of the two systems we just talked about.
There were 12 Silletan martyrs who were essentially executed because they absolutely refused to sign up for Rome's public religion and state welfare system. They weren't being executed just for believing in a man in the sky. They were being executed because they point-blank refused to participate in Rome's mandatory, coercive welfare state.
Look at how carefully they navigated this, though. They weren't political rebels. They paid their standard civil tribute to Caesar, but they legally avoided the state religious tax by providing their own social safety net through pure voluntary charity. They rightly divided bread from house to house. So they were practicing tax avoidance, which is perfectly legal, not tax evasion, by standing firmly in the separate constitutional order of Christ.
And history records a pretty striking consequence of this unjust trial. The judge, Saturninus, who unlawfully executed them for living in this separate constitutional order, well, he went completely blind and died within a year. Early Christians saw this as immediate, divine vindication that their legal and spiritual stance against forced welfare was absolutely righteous.
Section 5. Preparing for the Kingdom.
So how do we actually apply this incredible unified message from Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and the early martyrs to our lives right now? Because if we aren't practicing it, we aren't truly following their path, right? We have to learn how to operate through faith, hope, and charity, rather than relying on the coercive systems of the modern world. This is precisely why preparingyou.app was created. It is intended to prepare the user to live according to the laws of nature, the simple, logical, and righteous life God has intended all to live by. It's designed to help you connect with others and build that very network of voluntary charity that Abraham, Moses, and Jesus all preached was the only true way to organize society.
I'll leave you with this provocative thought. Which system are you trusting for your future? Are you eating the deceitful meats at the table of rulers, trapped in a cycle of covetousness? Or are you ready to choose liberty, walking the unbroken path of Abraham, Moses, and Christ? The link to preparingyou.app is in the description below, and you'll see the web address on the screen right now. Go check it out and start walking in the perfect law of liberty today.